Hi, hello, how you doing? So yesterday I started to plan a video on world building and I came across this article talking about the 4 C's of world building. Now this is something that I had never heard of before in my entire life. But the article did very much interest me. I didn't find much else information on this. I did find other similar articles that were like the 4 C's of team building and this and that, which obviously isn't relevant to the content that I make. The only article really that I found was this one, as well as a Reddit post talking about the 4 C's of world building. But I did find it interesting enough that I wanted to make a separate video about it. Now, the 4 C's of world building, which I'm going to explain what those are in a minute, I mainly found, at least in this article, to be explained as something that mainly fits with fantasy world building. And while I partially agree that a big part of this would apply to fantasy world building, and while I do believe that a good portion of this applies to fantasy world building, as a thriller author, I do find that a lot of this also can apply to other genres. Any type of world building, I feel this can apply to in some way, shape, or form. Especially if you're just adding any made-up element to your world, these things can apply. And then I'm thinking mainly of books like Stephen King's and his entire universe. While he technically writes in our world today, he has a lot of made-up elements in his books, from creatures to places, like Derry, Maine from his novel It. And I found that looking at books like that with elements like that, even though it's set in the real world, these things can also apply. Point being, no matter what genre you write in, I do think that this could be something useful to look into, and of course I will be linking the article down below in the description box. So what are the 4 C's of world building? Creative, complete, consistent, and compelling. These are the 4 things that every single made-up world, whether that be in a book, a movie, or otherwise, should be. And the idea is that if all of these 4 elements are done well and thought out, you at the end have a cohesive world that you can build a story in. With the first one obviously being creative. How much does your created world differ from our world? Which elements of your book come from the real world, which ones are completely made up, and which ones fall in the middle, being based off of something that we know here in the real world. With every single genre, whether that be fantasy, thriller, horror, contemporary, or otherwise, there is a certain standard and expectation when it comes to world building. The reader goes into the book expecting to see a certain something when it comes to the world. We have expectations, and our job as an author is to adhere to those to a degree, while also adding our personal spin and flair to it. That is what creates originality and allows our book to stand out from the crowd. The balance between what you want as the author and what the reader wants can be a very thin line, and oftentimes it can cross over, but there are also times where something that you want as the author versus what the reader wants is not always going to line up. So while it is okay to be creative, you also have to look at what your reader wants and expects from the world based off of the genre that you're writing, as well as, for example, the blurb on the back, what they already know from the story. If you market the book as steampunk, there is going to be an expectation that there is going to be steampunk. So when you are building the setting and your world for your story, it is absolutely important to not only brainstorm, but also line it up with reader expectations. The part where you can get creative is adding your own spin to it. Make it something that is original, or original enough that it stands out from the crowd. Is it something that we don't often see in books, or is it just something that hasn't been done in a long time? Have you taken a concept that, while we often see in books, in your world is done in a unique way, so that as a matter of fact, it is still different even though it comes from a concept we already know of. What is it about your world that is different from what readers have read in so many other books? For some readers, world building doesn't matter as much. So if your world isn't the most creative that they have ever read about, that's fine. However, the bulk of your readers, if you're planning to publish, is going to read books on the regular. Probably read books of your genre on the regular. There is a group of readers who don't care much about world building. However, these are often readers who either don't really read books on the regular or they don't read your genre on the regular. So they don't have a lot to compare your book with, or they just simply don't really care because it's not really a genre that they read all that often. So they might frankly be more easily impressed. Of course, while you can't make everybody happy, that is simply impossible, you do have to try to make the bulk of your readership happy. Of course, that doesn't mean that you have to twist and spin the entire story purely for your readers in a way that you are not happy with, but you do have a responsibility to your readers if you're deciding to publish to make the book something that is also entertaining for them to read as it was entertaining and fun for you to write. If your world building is not considered up to par, your readers will point it out, whether that be directly in reviews, taking off a star on Goodreads, or even possibly DNFing your book. This is why it is incredibly important to be creative and prioritize originality. The second of the 4 C's is completeness. Does your world feel lived in and have its own history? So this is essentially looking for plot holes. Plot holes, while the name is plot holes, don't purely exist in plot. If there is a hole somewhere in your setting, in your theme, in your characters, your readers will notice. They also notice it in world building, especially actually people who write fan fiction. They take the world that already exists and build on it further. So these readers especially will have a keen eye when it comes to picking apart your world and seeing exactly where you didn't fill in a hole as the author. Now, of course, there is not a single world, whether that be in the most popular books, movies, or video games, that is 100% foolproof. It just simply doesn't exist. There is always one hole or one thing that is not filled in because there's only so much that you can convey in a book, even if it is 1,000 pages long. While your world is often more so a supporting element to the rest of the story, it should somewhat be able to stand on its own. Completeness when it comes to world building can also mean that it has the ability to have multiple stories told within the same world. Now, I'm not saying that these stories have to be on the scale of you can write multiple books set in this world. Sometimes it's one book and the job is done. But think about it this way. Your characters are experiencing this huge adventure in this world and in this setting. But the side characters, the background characters, the minor characters that the main character only has one conversation with to order a drink at a bar still have their own lives. They still have their own stories, even if it's not told on paper. Your world should be rounded enough that these stories can take place in it without stretching the truth that is this world's lore, its history, and all the characters residing in it, and still be believable. Some important elements when it comes to world building are the history, its politics, religion, as well as smaller details, like the world's layout. Does it have a lot of mountains? Is it more flatland? Is it more swamp-like? And of course, each of these elements, from the history, politics, religion, and otherwise, has to have a reason for its existence. No part of your world should be in there just for fun. Everything that exists in your world has to exist for a reason. It is the same way in the real world. Everything has a reason for existing, and the moment that it no longer has a reason, it starts to die off and eventually just kind of leaves like it never existed. Your readers will want a reason for everything when it comes to your story, and logically so. That includes your world building. So if you're deciding to add an element, or say this world has a big mountain range, why did you choose mountains over flat land? Why do these characters, these people in this world, worship this god very specifically? What is the lore? How did that lore come into existence? Why is this god feared and this god loved? Don't leave that as a big question mark. Your readers will not only point it out, but it is seen as a flaw in your story. Don't mention something, including in world building, unless it is relevant to your story and to your characters. Now, again, there is not a single book out there, a single movie that has a setting that is foolproof. Eventually, you're gonna have to stop explaining. The important part is that the elements that are relevant to the story and the characters get an explanation. When we have those explanations as a reader, we can feel satisfied that we know everything that there is to know that is relevant and is important for our experience as a reader as well as our enjoyment. We can overlook not knowing a detail that simply would be fun to know, even if it isn't relevant. That is where our imagination picks up, and we as a reader just start fantasizing and plotting and theorizing. But we can forgive not knowing it for certain if it's not relevant to the story. That's kind of what fanfiction is for. It is going to be incredibly important for your reader to know all of these things. And again, if that is not the case, readers will point it out in reviews. They will let the world know this book has plot holes and it's in the setting. Your readers will let you know if there are plot holes there. And no reader wants to read a book that has plot holes. That includes world building. And again, like I said, there are a lot of readers who care a lot about world building. You don't have to be a fantasy author to get a reader who cares a crap ton about world building. The same way that there are a lot of readers who care a crap ton about theme, well-built characters, style. No genre is immune to the world-building critic. And they can be harsh critics. Which leads me to a third out of the 4 C's, which is consistency. Does the world contradict itself? Change its own rules on a whim? And to what degree does it do that? Consistency is important in every element of your story. Plot, characters, setting, your entire world is very prone to inconsistencies. You can be consistent 500 times, but if you get it wrong one time, your readers will point it out and their attention will be drawn to the one time that you were not consistent. Now, inconsistencies in world building can go from very small, like exactly where on the street a house is located, to very large inconsistencies like the history of your world, where your country is located on the map. Now, for the author, it can be hard to spot inconsistencies, which is where a lot of the time beta and alpha readers come in. They give you a fresh perspective on your story and don't look at it with the same emotional, connected way that you as the author might. So they might be much more effective when it comes to pointing out inconsistencies in your story. Now, of course, the number one way to get rid of inconsistencies is to edit and do so meticulously. Proper organization, whether that be in the form of a book bible or otherwise, goes a very long way, which I do have a video on organizing, as well as refreshing your memory often when it comes to your world building. Every couple of writing sessions, just going back and looking over your notes for your world building, especially if you are writing a certain setting or switching to writing about a new setting, go back to your notes, look it all over, refresh your memory to make sure that when there is an inconsistency there, you can catch it and correct it so that you don't have to go over it a million times and still have somebody else catch the mistake. The best thing that you can do as the author is to catch these things yourself, because it trains you to not only care but catch a lot more details and be able to do more work yourself. And of course, make sure that everything has a cause and effect, a reason for existing. If you connect a reason to why a certain thing exists, you're going to be much less likely to slip up when it comes to consistency. Cause and effect are always going to connect itself in your brain and therefore make it easier for you to be consistent when it comes to your writing. It is going to help you avoid mistakes as well as leaving out information entirely. Try to make as many connections mentally or using a notes app. I personally really like Obsidian. It has saved me countless times when it comes to world building and even characters, plot, all of that. Because when you connect something to another part of your world, it becomes much more relevant when you're writing, no matter really what it is that you're writing. Even if it is a connection that isn't relevant or completely obvious when put on a page, if you yourself as the author are able to connect it, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and it's going to help you a ton. And then the last of the 4 C's is compelling. How compelling is your world to your readership? How well does it keep your reader's attention? And how well does it captivate them to keep reading? Now, like I said, your world has to be able to stand on its own apart from the plot and characters. Your world has to be able to exist even if this particular story that you are writing in it does not happen. Let's say that these characters were never born. The conflict never happened. This world still needs to be able to exist and function. This is actually a very important part of what makes a world compelling and interesting to a reader, because it makes it feel incredibly well-rounded and truly shows that the author put a lot of time into world building and just overall shows that it was a part of the story that they really cared about as much as plot, characters, theme, or anything else. Ideally, you can give this setting or world to a couple of different writers and they will still be able to formulate different stories, if similar stories, in this world. It's the same way if you give an artist a prompt. The drawings might still be similar, but they're still different drawings. The same applies to your world. Originality, of course, also goes a very long way when it comes to making a compelling world, because it allows your reader to experience something new that they haven't experienced in another book or another story in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be a book. Your world shouldn't feel like a ripoff of another world saying, well, it just reminded me too much of X, Y, and Z. You might also not want to immediately reveal everything that your world has to offer. Don't info dump everything that there is to know about this world in the first couple of chapters or really at any point in the book. Allow the world to reveal itself slowly so you can keep your readers engaged and keep them questioning what else this setting and this world has to offer them. Give little sneak peeks with a promise of you're getting to know more later, whether that be in the same book or the next book or a spin-off series or anything of the sort. A very good example of this is the Mortal Instruments series by Cassandra Clare. There are multiple series set in the same world that is the Shadowhunter universe. And of course, this world is very big and there are many, many, many stories that are told in this. Not every world is going to offer that, but she does something very well in the sense that she shows a little bit at a time of the world that she created without saying this is everything that it has to offer. There's always more questions, there's always wonder as to whether there is going to be more information revealed later on. And while I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of these books, I have to give Cassandra Clare a lot of credit for the way that she built this world, because it was done incredibly well. And there is a reason that this book series got a movie as well as a TV series, because it is an incredibly well done setting. It also shows really well the history of this world, even if the books are set in different times and different places. But just because you don't write a book in multiple timelines in both present and past doesn't mean that you can't do the same thing. By simply giving glances into the history of the world that you're writing, you can achieve the exact same thing. Give information in very small increments to keep your reader going, keep them guessing, keep them wondering, and you're gonna have a very compelling world at the end of it. And even at the end of the story, your reader is allowed to wonder, what part of the world did we not see yet? Because there is obviously only so much of the world that your main character can travel through. So what parts of it have we not seen yet? How would the world have been presented if it was told from a different character's point of view? If it was told from the villain's point of view? How would we have seen the world then? Would we have seen it as much more cruel, much more kind? A lot darker? Would different elements of it have been presented more? There is so much that you can experiment with when it comes to making your world compelling. And again, this is where originality and creativity comes in. But the most important part is that you always keep your reader wondering and guessing. That you want to make them visit this world so that they can see exactly for themselves what this world is like. Now, like I said, all four of these can apply to every genre, in my opinion. Whether you are creating a whole new world or simply making up a new town to put your thriller novel in. There are literary fiction novels that take place in a whole nother world. I have one on my shelf that takes place in a version of the afterlife that isn't necessarily heaven or hell. It is not fantasy, but it is very much still a different world and something that took a lot of time and work to build from scratch. So these things can apply to every single genre, no matter how small the amount of world building is that you need to do for your story. These things can also apply to creating creatures. And again, I am looking at Stephen King's It, Pennywise. He is a creature on his own as much as he is part of the world that Stephen King created, and therefore, if you will, also part of the world building. And if you look at him as a creature, you can apply each of these four things to Pennywise as well. But you can see how all of these things can be applied to any world or any part of world building. Any made-up element that we don't see in the external world outside of books and outside of movies can use these four in order to build it properly. But this is definitely a concept that I myself will be using more in my own writing. I find it very interesting to do research on it, and again, I will be leaving the link to the article in the description box down below, as well as, if I can find it, maybe the Reddit thread that also talked about the 4 C's. Now, I hope that you found this video interesting and helpful, and I hope that you now have a bit of a better grasp on how to build a fictional world, because it can be incredibly hard, it can be incredibly challenging, and I think any bit of help that you can get with it is useful help. If you did consider checking out my other videos, I make writing related content on this channel every single week. And if you have something that you would like for me to talk about, let me know in the comment section down below. As for the rest, I hope that you have an amazing week. I hope that this helps you in your writing journey, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.